Another program of books and things, and we're getting into the Christmas holiday. That's why I wore my Christmas clothes, and but it's cool out there, and I guess we're getting into the cold area, but it's not snowing, and that's a good thing. Anyway, tonight we have a repeat customer who was here about a year ago when he wrote a book about the slave catcher's wife, which is a phenomenal book. You got to read it because it is a tremendous book. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you, Tom.
And I think you should read another one because I want to know what happens next.
I'm working on the sequel.
So my guest tonight is Jim Littlefield, and Jim is a retired history teacher and a coach, basketball.
I was a baseball coach for a
Baseball
long time
coach.
at Eastline. Yeah.
And so what are you doing now?
Well, things have changed quite a bit. I've completely finished with the school after 50 years at
50
Eastline
years.
in one capacity or another. I finished as the fitness center director last Tuesday. It was my last day. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So now I'm footloose and fancy free, and I guess what I'm doing is out with my new book and doing some book signings and talking to people about History Matters.
Do you find you have more time now that you're retired?
Well, yeah, I guess I have had a little more time. I have been on the golf course the last few days, believe it or not.
Ah.
But I know that I have plenty to do here, so I'll be out doing some work on this very soon.
I think that's what I find. I don't have time anymore, and I've been retired for 10 years. But it just seems like every time I turn around, there's something else to do. I'm not getting paid for it, but I'm enjoying it, and I think that's the key. And it gives you time to write books and do the research and do everything else.
Yeah, it does.
Now this looks like a very interesting book, History Matters. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yeah, let me give you a little quick synopsis of this. This all comes from a course that I taught at East Lyme High School called Senior Anthropology. And it was an elective course, and it was a course that I designed specifically to be an archaeology course on local history. So when the principal came to me and asked me if I would do something along this line, I said, if you can convince the Board of Education to have them allow me to go outside of school, have the class outside of school for 6 weeks, I'd be interested in setting up a course. So we started in '97, and we did it up until 2013. Or I did it up until, and so I ended out with all kinds of information that we got from the ground, we pulled from the ground, which I then wrote into articles for the Post Road Review, which was a local magazine. So I had some 60 articles, and people kept saying, can't you put those in a book? Can't you put them in a book? I said, okay, I'll do it. So I did it. Yeah.
Wow, so all the articles are in here.
Yeah, all 60 articles. I've actually written, I think, 63, but the first 60 are in there anyway. Well,
Now, when you say archaeological digs, you actually go out and physically look?
correct. I had a number of things going for me when I started this. My family had lived in the area a long time, since 1860, in fact.
Wow.
And I've been here my whole life. I knew a lot of people, so there were a lot of places I could dig. There's a lot of people that knew me, trusted me, and would allow me on their property. So there was that. And I also had a good friend by the name of Dr. John Pfeiffer, who was an archaeologist.
Oh.
So we kind of teamed up, and next thing you know, we were in the field together, and we were going down, digging up history, and we've come up with some fabulous stories over the years. Some of them we did in conjunction with Ledyard High School when he was over there, and some with Old Lyme High School when he taught over there. I was at East Lyme the whole time, but we would team teach and then go out in the field together. So it's a 6-week affair. You make sure that the place that you're going to has potential, and then what you want to do is you want to set up a series of test holes and look in likely places, and we would do that. And almost always we would stumble upon something quite worthy of talking about or writing about. So,
Now, you had mentioned something about finding a body, or?
we did find a body. We found on September 9th of 2009, we were digging in Waterford, down in Jordan Cove, and we, 16 inches down, ran into a Nehantic Indian in a fetal buried position. We had 4 archaeologists look at it. They all came to the same conclusion. It was about 800 years old. We were able to bring the local tribes there and the head of the tribal council, and it was quite an affair.
That's amazing. Now, when you find things, do you get to keep them? Or?
No, we keep nothing. And certainly in a dig like that where it's sensitive, I mean, you've got to be very, very careful there. We had to return everything we found to the gravesite when they reburied it.
Yeah.
But no, the deal normally, Tom, is that you you contract with the homeowner. We're going to find for you whatever is buried in your property. We get the opportunity to process it. You get all the artifacts.
Okay.
So I brought back a dozen huge boxes of artifacts for the homeowner. And most homeowners, what they'll do is they'll sift through it, they'll take certain things and put them out on shelves or keepsakes or whatever, and some of them have been fairly valuable. And then they'll throw away a lot of the stuff that was important to us, glass fragments, shards, things like that we would investigate, but because they were in bits and pieces, didn't have much meaning for the homeowner.
Yeah. But it's of importance to you.
Oh, absolutely, because when you've got pieces of bottles, for example, and you're looking for certain marks on it to determine where it was made and when it was made. And in archaeology, you have something called the law of association. And if you can prove, for example, this object found here was 1860, then you can make the assumption that some of the things nearby are similar time periods. So if you can date anything, it helps everything.
I can't imagine a body 16 inches down.
Yeah, it was near the water, and probably a lot had been washed away with time. It was in like this eelgrass, Phragmites, I guess it was, now that I think of it. And it wasn't too much there, and it didn't take too long for that young girl, 17-year-old girl, to clunk, 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 clunk. It looked like a coconut. It did look like a brown coconut at first, and oh my God, their eye holes. That was a person.
Hello, shock.
It was totally shocked. Yeah, John Pfeiffer said that's a 1 in a million find. He says archaeologists spend their whole life looking for stuff like that, and we just pointed in that direction. And
they're probably everywhere.
yeah, there were probably plenty more that were a little further towards the water because the water has risen. And they're probably, all his company, his people are probably under the water and dispersed by now.
Now, I remember years ago somebody saying that you find a lot of things along stone walls.
Always. Now, there's a reason for that. Stone walls are great retainers of leaves, and leaves are great creators of soil. John Pfeiffer, I remember him telling me that leaf degeneration in a deciduous area can produce about 1/8 of an inch of soil per year. So if you got a lot of leaves, you've got a lot of potential to catch artifacts, and then it turns to dirt. And we've actually looked down a stone wall, Tom, and found one side was this high, the other side was this high, and this is the side that you want to look on because that's where the artifacts are. There's so many leaves collected.
Yeah. And why is it near the stone walls? Did people drop the things there? Or?
Well, we found things that people shoved in stone walls.
Oh, really?
So people will sit on stone walls.
Yeah.
And anytime anybody sits, the pockets, stuff falls out of their pockets. Walls are well trafficked.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing is that they'll stop leaves from blowing, and once they stop them, they'll create this soil, and you've got all this soil that's ripe over the years for stuff to be dropped there.
That's interesting. That's when I lived up in Legend, I always wanted to go dig up in some of the yard because I lived on an earthquake fault, and there's got glaciers up there. Not glaciers, but they got the remains of the glacier where the glacier froze, and they got caverns. And I've never been down there because there's a lot of snakes walking around down there, so I don't play with them. But my son had gone down, and there were actual caverns where the ice had formed, and then when it melted, it left this big vacant hole.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're going to find too much in the way of human activity there, but you probably, if you're a geologist, that would be a paradise.
Yeah.
That'd be really neat.
Yeah. But I've always found it interesting. I've never gone out and actually dug or anything, but I bought my grandson one of the metal detectors, and I don't know if he's ever used it.
Yeah, we don't usually like to use those because that sort of circumvents the process. What you want is you want to be able to lay the thing out in a grid so that you can record everything. You want people down on their hands and knees. They have a 4-inch trowel, and they're basically, we call it shaving, because you're actually shaving the history away. And then you'll put this into a bucket, and then you'll sift what's in the bucket. So that is a great way to carefully process. If you've got, a metal detector, we've used them twice, and only out of sheer frustration did we use them. Relic hunters, people that just go out looking for relics, are generally not highly regarded by the archaeological community. They want the scientific processing to take place.
Yeah, and actually a metal detector is not going to pick up glass and wood. And
no, it's not going to pick that up.
Or
right. It'll pick up your metals, and the good ones will tell you what kind of metals, how deep. We found. I'll tell you a great story about a metal detector. If you got a minute here, there was a state police badge found at Niantic Center School by a guy who was a real big-time, metal detector fan. And he knew I wrote for the Post Road Review, so he told me where he had found it and what he had found. And it was a badge with a serial number, badge number 5, a very low serial number. And he asked if the class would try to investigate it. So we talked to the state police. We talked to they have a museum up in Meriden. Talked to a number of local people. We not only found who had the badge from 1921.
Wow.
A guy named Pearlie Roberts from Norwich, but we found out that the badge had been recycled and dropped in I think it was 58 or 59. And we even talked to the guy who was there when the badge was lost.
Really?
I mean, the whole story just absolutely came together.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy, if you ever go to the State Police Museum, Pearl Roberts was the first state police officer to be killed in the line of duty. He wore badge number 5. And we tried to track his family down to find out if it had been in the family.
Yeah.
Found out they don't give the badge to the family. It goes back to the police department.
No.
Then they recycle them.
Yeah, they'll give you a replica.
Okay.
Because I ran into that. My son's great-grandfather was a lieutenant in the Cranston Police Department. He rode the motorcycles.
Oh, yeah.
Picture of the big boots on him. And my son had the badge. His great-grandmother gave it to him. And it's a gold badge with a lieutenant on it. One night, for some ungodly reason, he had the badge with him. He's down in Providence. And the kid that he was with was showing the badge, making believe he was a cop. So they called him in. And they let him go because it was not a big deal. And so I called the police department up and I said, I'd like to get the badge back. He said, I'm sorry, I can't give you the badge back. He said, but I'll give you another one. So he gave us a brand new badge, but the original is gone.
Right. This original now is on display, and they said it's worth $1,000.
Really?
It was donated by Gerald Maher, who was the guy who found it. But our class, we got an opportunity to discover who had it first and who dropped it during an investigation at a later date. Those are fabulous stories. So there's been a couple of things where metal detectors have proved to be the deciding factor. But in most cases, it's that simple, oh my God, what is this? And then off we go. And we do have a lab, by the way, too. We have a lab, and of course we have the library right near the lab, so we can do all our research there. So as soon as you find something, we get it all cleaned up, we get everything labeled. I mean, we're out there working on trying to figure out.
Are there many labs in the area?
Well, this is our high school lab.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is our high school lab, where we do all our cleaning and cataloging.
Yeah.
So, but it's certainly benefits our, it's good enough for our needs.
Yeah.
It might not be as something like the might have over at the Pequot Museum. They have a great lab over there.
I can't imagine what their lab is.
One of my students works over there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of my former students.
Wow. I had one of the tribal members on a couple weeks ago, and I think she's a medicine woman now, and she got another title. But and I can't remember what she said, but there was a scarf or something that's been handed down through the generations over 300 years, and only 3 people have owned it. She's actually the 4th, because each one of the people lived to be 100 and some years old, and they just passed this thing down. So 300 years, only three owners, which I thought was fascinating. I've got to get to that museum though, because I understand it's really gorgeous.
One of the things, you think about all the kinds of things that you'd like to find, rings and jewelry. We found engagement, we found a lot, wedding rings, we found a lot of that stuff. But sometimes some of the simplest things become the oddest things. I'm going to give you a quick example. We found a blue eyeglass lens one time at a dig at the Smith-Harris house. And we didn't make much out of it, but there was something going on that several people had complained of in the house, that they heard a scream, a premoral scream that no one could identify. And being on the committee there, the commission, we checked for squirrels and we checked for branches screeching against the side. We tried, and nobody could come up with an answer. But one day we were doing some research on this blue eyeglass lens, and we were talking about medicine in the 1800s. They were talking about eyeglass lenses being for various conditions. For example, if a person had a venereal disease, a doctor might prescribe a yellow eyeglass lens. It was thought to have healing qualities.
Really?
If you had depression, rose-colored glasses, that's where that expression comes from. But blue was insanity.
No kidding.
So we went, wait a minute. We got this scream, this insane scream, and we got this blue eyeglass lens. How could we possibly bring it? We brought in a group of Ghostbusters. We brought in a group called REP, the Regional Investigators of the Paranormal. And there was about a half a dozen of them, Tom. And I'm not really too keen on this as a general rule.
Yeah.
But they were fantastic. And they hit a number of things right on the head, and were able to come up with they came with a tremendous amount of equipment. And they had lights, infrared lights going, and heat meters and all kinds of things. And they found on this tape recorder, this very sensitive tape recorder, they heard the name Sarah, which, as we started doing research, it turns out that there was a young girl named Sarah who was 2 years old, who died in probably about 1850. And the mother died 2 years later at 29 years of age, most likely of a broken heart.
Oh, wow.
So whether or not that is her scream, it's been heard by maybe half a dozen people over the years.
Really?
I've never heard it. My wife has. So, I mean, here's an eyeglass lens, a blue eyeglass lens, but out of that comes this, maybe it's a little bit of a fantastic story and maybe even a little bit of a reach, but I think one thing we learned is that it seems like everything we believe in, it's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
And so whether it's paranormal or whether it's this thing, doctor prescribing it for insanity, it makes interesting copy.
That is neat.
It's in this book.
It's got to be a ton of great stories in this book.
A lot of great stories.
Yeah. That's what you like. It's like short stories that get you interest.
Yeah, there are about 1,500 words, which if you're typing, it's 2.5 typewritten pages. I'm pretty good at figuring that out because that's how long the editor, Brian Conklin, gives me. He usually gives me a couple of pictures as well. Yeah, they make good bedtime reading. You can read 1 or 2 of them a night.
I can't wait.
Like I say, there's 60 of them all together. But you name it. I mean, if you want to learn how to do a straight razor shaving, we found plenty of old rusty straight razors, so we did some research on it. If you want to know something about, we found out that one of the houses we were working at, the guy worked for Abraham Lincoln in 1864, knew him personally.
No kidding.
We were able to make that connection with a primary document and also a toothbrush that said Washington, D.C. on it.
Wow.
Yep.
That's cool. So you could really get into the history.
Oh, you can tie things together nicely. And we talked once before about Carol Kimball, and I talked about Olive Shindali, our Carol Kimball in East Lyme.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I had that neither one of them had is I had this stuff. I mean, I had these artifacts. We had these things that had come from the ground that were begging to be investigated.
Yeah.
So we were able to, then we could use town records. Then we could use, the internet and wherever else you're doing your research on to put these things together. So I think that's why it makes such interesting reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a couple weeks ago, a couple months ago, I guess, I had a gentleman on, and he wrote about some artifacts that he had. He's got an adze, and he had it in here. I think it's about that big and
Was
heavy.
it Native American or was it?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah, Native American. It was 2 of them, and he writes a story about that and how he came about it, and et cetera, et cetera. He had a porcelain piece of a Hitler's toilet. When they blew it up, his grandfather, I guess, was in there, and he saw it and brought it home. So he's got this piece of porcelain, and again wrote a big story about that whole piece of
That makes good stories. We
Yeah.
found a swastika. We found a Nazi swastika on a 5.5 inch by 5 shovel-shaped metal. Is kind of some kind of an insignia of some kind, but the swastika was very clear near the bottom. And we were able to take that swastika. It led in 2 different directions. It led to Black Point, if you know where Black Point is, because there was a Nazi spy who grew up down there named William Curtis Colepaw. And we did a whole bunch of research on William Curtis Colepaw. But it also led in another direction to a U.S. Army man who left his bracelet in the same basic area. His name was Arland E. Ball. So when we found that, we were trying to figure out who left this swastika. We checked out Colepaw, but we had to ask, does anyone know anything about Arland E. Ball? Who shows up at the school? Arland Ball's daughter.
Oh, no kidding.
Lives in Stonington. And she knew very little about her dad because he died when she was 7 or 8 years old. They lived up in Alaska.
Wow.
So here she's looking through the internet, looking for information. Her sister, and they find my article in the Post Road Review. So I ended up giving that bracelet back to her eventually, along with a swastika, along with a couple other artifacts that were his. That swastika did not belong to William Curtis Colepaw. It belonged to him. But we were able to put a pretty good cap on that story.
Wow.
And you mentioned a celt, you mentioned an adze. We
Yeah.
found an adze on the Niantic River. It was used for carving out dugout canoes. So I did an article about how dugout canoes were made.
And that's what this guy was doing. But it was so interesting that he's got all these articles, and he wrote a whole book. I mean, the book is, a thick book. And he wrote this big book about all these different things. And I thought, how interesting to write a whole thing just on, I think he only had like 10 articles.
Yeah.
It was a gun, some old gun that was used, but it's interesting. And that's what's interesting about history. You can go back and dig all this stuff up and come up with these fantastic stories.
And it's up to you how inclusive you want to be. I mean, if you can just stay with that particular artifact or whatever, but that artifact can expand and you can contextualize it. Next thing you know, you've got this whole story. I started with a razor, but we end out with the whole thing about a tonsorial parlor and what it was like to have your first shave and, that whole thing. From one small comes a big.
I just went through a couple of things with my grandson, and this really kind of ties it in. I was showing him my car collection. I've got about 200 models, from anywhere from 164th to 124th. And I got them all on the wall. And I was showing it to him. He said, yeah, it's nice. And I'm thinking, he doesn't appreciate it. So I said, well, you see the row up top here, all the little cars? And he said, yeah. And he said, well, those are English. And they're about $25, $30 a piece. He said, you're kidding. I said, no, a lot of these cars are worth nothing.
Now he starts counting up.
And now I start showing him some of the particular cars. And it's the story. Now he's interested in the collection because he knows the story behind a lot of the different cars.
Right.
And it's the same with you.
That's exactly what it is. And that's why I say history matters. I mean, there's 2 meanings there. But when those stories start coming together, it becomes meaningful to you.
Yes.
I say in the introduction that, we hear voices. I mean, you do. You hear the voices of the past talking to you. And they're willing to offer information that can help you along.
Yeah.
If you like history, even if you don't like history, you can still profit from
Yeah.
history if you listen. And you're not going to listen unless the story captures you somehow.
Exactly.
And that's what I tried to do with this.
And I think, too, the people have to understand that today will be history tomorrow.
Exactly.
And if you write down what's going on today and you find a little something you want somebody to remember, write it down.
Yep.
And 20 years from now, they're going to say, oh, that's happened before.
Right.
And that's why I love history, because every day you're making it again.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, there's so much that has the potential to be recorded. I mean, you want to pick meaningful things, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what history books are supposed to be about.
Yeah.
But they have to be meaningful. They have to hit people on a personal level, I think. You just can't throw a generic thing out at someone. It
No.
has to ring for them.
Yeah, exactly. Like in my book, we talked about a lot of stuff, the mystic book.
Mystic, sure.
And talk about things like inkwells in a school table. Means nothing unless you know what it was for.
Right.
And you say, well, that inkwell, that was for this here, and you just take the ink out and spill it all over the place. And
We must have found 200 inkwells when we dug up East Lyon's first school. And as interesting as that is, I mean, we found all the things they wrote with, the slate pencils, but the most interesting thing I think we found there was a piece of slate where somebody had carved the name Mary into it. Graffiti is a great thing for archaeologists.
Oh, wow.
And there's a whole story in there about who we think might have done, such a dastardly thing. But you never know what you're going to find when you dig into the ground. And digging at that schoolhouse produced stories that went as far afield as France. We sent one of the artifacts there back to France. It turned out to be from the French Revolution.
I've only got a few minutes left.
Okay.
When you just held up the sign. Where can we buy your book?
The book is on Amazon, of course, but it is around town. It is at Bayberry's at East Lyme, in Niantic, I should say. It's at Barber Plus One. It's at Tri-Town. It's at Tracus, Sunoco. It's at Book Barn, and Book Barn has been terrific.
Oh, really?
Terrific. And Book Barn still carries my first book as
good.
well. It's at Bank Square Books and Monte Cristo Books
Yeah.
and those. So it's getting out there. The book, we just got it, I think about a week or so ago. So it's still brand new. Make a good Christmas gift.
If you want a copy, email me, santostom@comcast.net, and I'll be more than happy to get you in touch with Jim. And you can also go to his website, which is up there somewhere, jimlittlefield.com. And you got both books up there.
Correct.
Great. A couple of announcements to make. Hoping everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving and a safe one. It was the weather was great, and it was beautiful for visiting people. Legend and Stonington won their football games. Hooray, hooray! And because I root for Stonington, and my son went to Legend, so I have to root for both of them.
Cross allegiances.
And we survived Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and shopping on Thanksgiving until next year. Now we just got to go out and buy a local Christmas gifts and get everything planned for Christmas, and it's coming up quickly. Next week, I've got John Alston, who is the author of a new children's book, and you're going to find out that John wrote this book with a lot of help from his friends. I think it's going to be very interesting. And December 18th, I've got Santa Claus coming. And Santa Claus is going to discuss the trips and everything. And then for the following week, I'll have him back on Christmas night. You should be reading and cuddle up with a good book. Thank you for watching. See you next week. And thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, he holds up his 2 minutes out.